Welcome to another episode of Courageous Me. I'm very excited. Today I've got the incredible Sue West. Now, I met Sue when an ex-client of mine, but she's also now a friend of mine, Natalia Smith. She she brought together a whole lot of her female professional clients, and I ran a workshop called The Valuable Woman. And this beautiful Sue was actually in that workshop, and I've been sort of following her along and seeing what she does. And she does some incredible work, particularly with women at that really exciting stage of life, kind of, 50 and above. But Sue, I'll get you to explain all of that shortly. Before we get into the nitty gritty, what excites you to have a conversation with me today about courage?
Thank you, Kim. And I have to start by saying that in 3 months, I'm turning 60. And so I've been in a process of reflecting on my life and what's important to me and where I'm going. And preparing for this interview today has been an absolute gift because it's brought a particular lens for me to think back over my life about key moments, key times when uh, courage has been really important to me. So thank you for that. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some of my insights with you today.
Oh, I love it. And I love that you said it's a gift, because I must say, one of the things that I get most out of this is at the end when we finish, the amount of women who've gone, that was actually really good. I'm really good. I'm like, yes, you are. So,
Yeah.
if it is a gift and allows you to understand, and I know anyone listening is going to get a whole heap of golden juice out of it that will be of benefit to them. So, on that note, Sue, you've done some reflecting. You're not far off
Yes.
your 60th birthday, which is very cool. Tell me and go back as far as you want, where do you remember courage really playing a part in your life? Like I said, somewhere, anywhere, in a story that you'd like to share with us.
Okay, thanks. And so I want to share with you my thoughts about courage as well. And one of the people whose work I really admire is David White, who's a poet. And he wrote this beautiful thing about courage that I'd like to read to you, if that's okay. And then
Love
I'll
to.
use that as my kind of framework for telling you a little bit about my life. So he says that courage is the measure of our heartfelt participation with life, with one another, with a community, a work, a future. To be courageous is not necessarily to go anywhere or do anything except to make conscious those things we already feel deeply, and then to live through the unending vulnerabilities of the consequences. So when I think back on my life and I think about courage from that perspective, then I can see that there have been these really significant milestone points in my life where there's a coming into an owning of who I am, and then a living into that is how I started to think about courage. And the very first time, well, there's probably lots of times in childhood, but the first time that I can remember that being a really significant experience for me was when I was 23 and I fell in love with my best friend, who was a woman. And so it was a coming into myself and a knowledge of being gay and knowing that that's how I was going to live my life and wanted to live my life, and what that meant for me going forward, which has had lifelong consequences, which these days, if it was someone, one of my children coming out at 23, it's a whole different kettle of fish. But for me, back in the, what would have been the late 80s, it was a really significant difference to the people I was surrounded by and my family of origin. It was putting a kind of a marker around my identity that was quite different. And then, of course, when I actually thought back about courage, I thought the moment was when I told my parents. But when I looked at David White's poem, the courage was the me in the first instance, and then the consequences of that were telling my parents. Mm.
Absolutely. And can I ask, are you okay if I ask you some questions about
Yeah,
this?
absolutely. Yeah.
Were you aware before falling in love with your best friend that you were gay? Like, is that
No, not
something
at
that
all.
you weren't aware of it?
No, not at all. I think I'd had little moments where I've gone, oh, I could be, but it wasn't an absolute awareness in any way, shape, or form. Yeah.
You
And
know,
actually, the process was a little bit painful because
Mm.
it really was, a lot of delight, but also a, "Gosh, what does this mean?" you know, and confusion and all of that sort of
Mm.
thing.
What
Yeah.
was the delight part of it? That's an interesting way
Oh,
to
love,
explain
falling in love.
falling in love. Yes, right, yes, but it just
Yeah.
happened to be with a woman, not a man. Now, if this was a best friend, was it requited?
No, it was not requited. So that was not something that I was able to pursue. Yeah, with
Okay.
that
But
person.
what it did was it allowed you the realization that this is who you are. How long from realizing till sharing that with your parents? What
It was
was
a
the
couple of
time frame?
years. It was a couple of
Couple of years.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
I
when was the
think,
moment that you did it, and why that moment?
yeah, great question. It was, I think I'd reached a point where I felt comfortable enough in myself about that truth about me, and yet was continuing to live, it's a lie is a really strong way to say it, but I wasn't being my authentic self with my family. And the tension, the internal tension around that became too much. So it was a tipping point where I went, actually, it's now really important that I share that information with them. I was living in a share house with some other women, and I told them how terrified I was, and went to my parents' place with my runners on in case I needed to run away. And one of my housemates gave me a crystal, which was for safety. so, so you can, it probably tells you that I didn't expect it to go well.
And how did it go? What did you need to run
um,
as in the crystal?
I didn't have to run, but I certainly needed all of my um, everything about me to be present in that moment with them, and to share that news in a way that was, real and authentic to me, and not too confronting for them. I don't know that that went so well, but essentially their response was that they were completely taken aback, and they probably said some things on that first night that were pretty rejecting of me and where I was at, and they didn't want that for me, and they didn't want that for my life, and they didn't want it for their lives either. Mm.
Well, absolutely. That's right. It's not just that you're going through all of this, it's also how that plays out with them. And especially as you said, Sue, this is back in the 80s,
Yeah,
where there was very much about, how we're perceived as a family and how we come across and what other people think was so important.
yeah, that's right.
Wow. And so how has that played out or impacted your life? Or is that now really just one moment that happened? This is how it was, and then life carried on. Talk to me about that.
Well,
That's
life always carried on, but I guess it was in looking back, what I could see and what I experienced at different points in my life was the gradual accepting by my family of who I was. And if I think about my parents' headstones, my partner's name is on that as their as their daughter-in-law. So that was a really, you can't get much more accepting than that, really, can you?
no,
Yeah,
absolutely no. And
yeah.
are your parents still alive
They're
today?
not. No, they're not now. Yeah,
They're not now, but they did accept it and allow that to be who
yeah.
you are, and that's okay.
Yeah, and it came, there were points along the way where that was challenging. So another time was when I'd made the decision to have a child, and so it was a little bit like realizing that I was a lesbian. I realized that I wanted to have a child, and I had to really sit with that for a little while and work out what that meant, and what I was going to do about that. And at the point when I had that all resolved, I went to my parents and told them, and it was another rupture in our relationship because they didn't agree with what I was doing, and they didn't accept it, and they were really confronted by it. So, but again, there was a movement that they did to overcome that, and fully embraced myself and my children as a result.
Oh,
Yeah,
lovely. So children, so you had multiple children?
I have 3 children. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
and they're all grown up now, is that right?
18 to 23, so three of them in that age range. Yeah.
Lovely. Oh, how gorgeous. Oh, I love that. What a beautiful story so far. And so tell me then, you work with a lot of women now. How did you get into that line of work? Like, where does
Yeah.
that come from?
So I think the career story for me is kind of quite connected to who I am and what I value. And so from a very early age, I was really concerned about the way that women were treated in society, and at various points in my life have stepped into doing something about that. So when I was a student, for example, studying at university, I was the women's officer in the student union, trying to make a difference for other students and trying to get childcare on campus and all of those sorts of things. So I've always kind of had the either studying or working that's about following my path, but then trying to contribute and bring value to others along the way as well.
What were
So
you
that
studying at university? Just
I did a
curious.
Bachelor of Arts with a focus on community work. So then
Ah, okay.
my first job out of uni was working running a community centre that was for women who were experiencing isolation, family violence. They were new refugees to Australia and didn't know many others. So really, lots of women, mental health issues, living in poverty. And so really early on in my career, I was about wanting to make a difference for women.
What about when you were growing up? Did that theme, and this is why I kind of want to go from your personal story into work, because when you said earlier on that it was about like coming into who you are
Yeah.
and having told that story about coming out as being gay, I'm not surprised you do the work that you do. So I just wanted to find that connection. What about if we go back to when you were little and just you saying now about wanting to really make a difference and working with those where they are disadvantaged or they don't have it as easy as, say, others appear to.
Yeah.
Did that sort of play out in your life at all as a kid? Like, were you kind of the girl that stood up for everyone else, or where
I
did that
don't know
come
that I
from?
was, but I think I did go to a Catholic secondary school that was run by nuns. So really, a group of really powerful women. And at the time of the early 80s, there were also lay teachers coming into the school, so non nuns, and again, really powerful women. And so women who at that time were having to establish themselves as professionals in their education career as educators at a time when, for example, women were expected to be, if you had a if you were married and had children, you should be at home with them. And I had this amazing teacher who was like, well, if I'm going to be a good mum, I also need to be happy within myself. And what brings me joy is teaching. So I had those kind of role models around me. And I rejected Catholicism pretty early on in my life. But I think if there's something that I really took from it, it was about that care for more disadvantaged and vulnerable communities and people. So quite a strong sort of social justice lens that I was exposed to through my education.
There's usually some connection that goes back in, and it's like, oh, I want to know this. Why did you reject Catholicism?
Um, that's a big, big question.
You put
I
it out
think,
there. It's like, oh, I want to know this.
well, I think it was a really long time ago, and I just think that I wasn't a believer. I think that's probably the easiest way to say it. I wasn't a believer, and the church in the name of God has also been exposed for committing atrocities to people, to humans. So on the one hand, espousing to be good for humans, and then being actually in behaviour not so good. So there was that was kind of part of my early experience. But I just think that as I started to grow and develop my own ideas about the world and how I understood the world, the further and further I got away from thinking that that kind of Catholic framework was something that I adhered to. Yeah,
but
that's probably
that's
the easy
interesting.
version.
Yeah, no, no, I understand. I appreciate the enormity of that question. But it's interesting that it was that rejection of the piece of it around what became inhumane, the not, espousing to being the righteous, whatever their thoughts and philosophies are. It's no surprise that you did reject it given where you've gone and what you're actually standing for and fighting for.
Yeah,
Yeah, interesting. So
yeah.
so How clear are you right now on who you are?
I don't think I could be any clearer in the sense that for where I am now, and if you ask
Mhm.
me in 2 years' time, I might have different reflections looking back.
Mm,
But in terms of where I am now, I feel really clear about who I am and what I'm doing in the world. And I'm
mm,
continuing to learn and grow and develop as we always do. But I think the experiences that I've had in particular over the last 10 years have really brought me into the imperative of knowing myself well. And that was as a result of my long term relationship ending and becoming a single parent and working a really busy job and supporting my mother who was dying. So I had a lot of big responsibilities all at once that I was managing and navigating. And over time, some of those have resolved, but it was a bit of a time of reckoning about who am I, what matters most to me, where am I going to put my energies, and how am I going to manage myself through this period. And I think there was an opening that occurred for me during the pandemic to go a bit deeper into that, because the parts of my work that I really loved, I wasn't able to do anymore. I was at home. I wasn't out and about and traveling the world and, you know, talking on stages and all the things that brought a lot of energy to me. I was at home with my family day in, day out. And, there was one point I remember saying to them, I think it's time we started seeing other people. It's like we were,
supplementary too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we need a hairdresser to move in with us. But um, but because the parts of my work that I really enjoyed were unavailable to me, I was sitting in a bit of misery, and so really needed to think about what is it that's going to light me up. And at that time, I was 57 and thinking about, probably got another 10 years of work left. What am I going to do with that time? I'd been in my job for 10 years. It was time to move on. And I just had no clue about what I would do. So I just, for the first time in a really long time, I just sat in that question for a while and had thoughts, talked with people, wrote, slept on it, uh, and gradually the answer emerged, and it's still emerging. Hmm.
Oh, wow. Oh my goodness. I've got like a million questions now I want to ask you because I think this is a journey that a lot of women go through. I know personally, I've been on the same journey as well. We're really going in and finding out who am I really and how am I bringing that version of me to the world and showing up completely as who I am. Because to me, that's complete liberation when you can do that. As you're doing all of this reflection, so you've had these things that have happened that have disrupted what normality looked like prior. What were you learning about you that you maybe didn't know beforehand that either surprised you or that you go, yeah, I see why this is me or why this is coming up? I'm really interested in this journey of finding out who you are, how that's kind of played out.
Hmm. It's a really interesting question. I think when whenever I've done those tests like Myers-Briggs, I'm always in the middle between being a critical thinker and an intuitive thinker.
Mm,
And I think what I discovered, or what occurred to me during those COVID years, is that I've really had leaned into the critical thinker me in my career. For the last 20 years, had been an academic and bringing I describe it as my big brain self to the world's problems, and putting my effort and energy behind research and projects and partnerships that would for the last 10 years, change outcomes for disadvantaged kids in Australia. And it was when I sat with the next 10 years of my career, and I don't have access to this sphere of influence that I had when I was not locked in my home. Um, I started to think about that more intuitive side of myself and the empathic side of myself. And very early on, when I was making decisions about what course I was going to go to uni and study, there were two pathways open, and one was kind of the critical thinking pathway, and the other was towards counselling or social work or something down that direction. And I thought, I've got 10 years of this work to do. It's now time for me to go back and explore the part of me that's yet to be explored. It was still sitting there, and it's time. It's time for her to come out and say hi.
Oh my goodness, I love this. I love this. I love though that you've recognized that almost these two versions, that really critical thinking that's been academic, but you've got this intuitive side and this genuine empathy for humans, and especially those that don't have the same sort of privilege that
Mm.
others might have. And that you've explored, because this is a question I get a lot with women that are like, I've been doing this for most of my life, but there's got to be more to it. I just don't even know where to start or what to do. And this has come through you and you've done something about it.
Yeah,
As
and Kim, can I
yeah,
say, I listen to
yeah.
lots of your podcasts, and I've
Yeah.
also listened to your story. And, I work with women who are going through these same sort of career transitions. And
Mm,
really often, what I find is that there is actually a seed of an idea that sits within.
yeah.
And I heard that in your story as well, that when you
Mm.
talked about your career change, had been a little idea, a seed of something that had been sitting there for a while. And I suspect for most of us, we have these, and that goes back to David White's definition of courage about, um, about being conscious of those things we already know. And the time comes and there it is, and there's an opportunity for that part of ourselves to come forward.
And isn't it interesting though? I completely agree. And I'm in love with that poem, but it's almost like, little breadcrumbs are left and we drop them as we go. And then that time comes when we then start to trace them back, and it leads us almost back to where they've stemmed from, or that source.
Yeah.
And I know that a really big part for me was having spent 30 years in financial services and very, very left brain, and also very heavily populated with a lot of men and that masculine energy. I suppressed a lot of my feminine energy to play the game with the boys.
Mm.
And yet when I worked all this out and again followed those breadcrumbs, it's like, go figure, it was always there, but I wasn't ready necessarily to embrace it and to move on with it. So it's almost like I can see that these breadcrumbs for you have stemmed back to when you were at school being raised by nuns and strong women doing what they wanted to do to really help others. It's no surprise that this is where you've come back to. So can you talk about, so you're in academia. Tell me what you were doing and how you found moving, say, into finding, who you are now in this space that is more on the intuitive side.
Yeah, okay. Great questions. So, in my academic career, I prefer to think of myself or describe myself as a pracademic in the sense that I was always using research, knowledge, evidence to bring to social problems, issues, or things that we wanted to change in the world. So, it was very my research was very impact focused. So, for the previous 10 years, I'd worked at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute and the Royal Children's Hospital, where I led a research group there that had a focus on policies, government policies and services, and how we could improve those to maximise good outcomes for kids in Australia. The period before that, I was deeply working in the western suburbs of Melbourne, and again using sort of those university resources of knowledge and research and evidence to look at how partnerships in the region could work to support and challenge poverty. So poverty was my early one. Community wellbeing was my focus at Melbourne University, and then child wellbeing was my focus for the last 10 years.
Yeah, but from a very academic standpoint and policy and strategy perspective, is that correct?
Yeah, and the research was always designed around what's the end in mind that we want to achieve with this. So it wasn't research for the sake of navel gazing or following our own curiosity about a topic or whatever. It was very driven by wanting to shed light on problems and issues and solutions to those.
Yeah, beautiful. So when you've done all this reflection then over COVID and what came out of that,
Mm.
what were your next moves? What did you actually do?
So, probably the connection I'll also make is that in
Mm.
the last number of years at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, I was invited into a program to be a mentor to others in the institute, and it was the first time, because I have a very non-traditional academic career, it was the first time that I felt kind of as though I had something to offer other academics who were also on similarly non-traditional paths. So, for example, I was a research group leader and the associate director of a research centre, and I was the only one in the institute who didn't have a PhD. So I was elevated into executive level and high level of responsibility, but didn't have academic qualifications to back that up. So to be then invited in to mentor a whole bunch of other younger people who are also kind of muddling their way through and finding their path was a really, really delightful thing. And I'm really pleased to say that one of the areas of work that I'm continuing to do is coach academics in their career paths, and that brings me a lot of pleasure. So I've brought that forward into this new phase of my career. But in terms of getting started, I wasn't
Just
quite
before you
sure.
go,
Yes.
sorry, can I just finish something there?
Mm,
How did you feel knowing that you were put in a position to mentor others who had PhDs, which is very unusual, as you just said,
mm.
but you didn't have one? How did you feel doing that?
Well, by that stage, I'd had more than 15 years being in leadership roles where I had teams of staff who had PhDs and surrounded by doctors and professors, and it was part of my world and a place that I felt really comfortable. So for me, it was less around the academic qualification and more around how people navigate their academic careers. Mm.
And no, did you know what I love about this though, Sue? Because as soon as you said that, I know so many other people that feel like that whole imposter syndrome kicks in if they're put in a position, but they start to go,
Yeah.
I don't have the qualification or I don't have this or blah, blah, blah. What I love though is that you knew what value you could still bring to this position, even though you didn't have the words PhD at the end of your name or doctor in front of your name, that you had enough confidence in what you already did know and the value you could bring. Like, I think that is just such a beautiful and powerful quality.
Thank you. And I think that
Mm.
comes because universities and research institutes are changing in regard to needing to demonstrate the impact of their research. So, research skills, which you achieve through the apprenticeship of a PhD, for example, are really important. But so too is knowing how to use that knowledge in the world
Yeah.
and how to gear your research around the people who you're going to impact and engage them in the research process and those sorts of things. So I knew that I had a set of skills, knowledge, and a lifetime of experience that would bring value to their careers going forward, and it wasn't something that others in the institute necessarily had.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I love that. That is so beautiful. And that's again starting to recognize your own value from within
Yeah.
based on everything. So, sorry, go back because I did cut you off to follow that little path. So,
Mm.
what were the next moves you made after this?
So I decided after having had a lifetime of with perfectionist tendencies that I would move out of that into a place of experimentation. And so I was continuing to work in my other job, but I created what I was calling 90-day experiments, where I would commit to something an hour a day for 90 days, and which gave me space and really allowed me to explore and go deeper on possibilities of where I might be going. So I'd get up early in the morning and I'd work for an hour and And at that time, the initial exploration is, do I want to be a psychologist? Do I want to be a social worker? Do I want to be a psychotherapist? Do I want to be a coach? I knew it was about working with people in a direct way, and I just wasn't sure how to make it happen. So I spent a bit of time exploring that.
Oh, I love it. And how old are you when you're doing this? Can I ask again, just for context?
57.
You're 57.
Yeah.
You've decided you want to make this change. And because you're not quite sure what it looks like, you're experimenting and you're giving yourself an hour a day to host or to do work in this experimentation phase.
Yeah. Yeah.
So give me an example of, in an hour, what would you do that is part of this, one of your 90-day experiments?
So it might be Googling to see what courses are available,
Mhm.
what their requirements are, how long they take, what they cost, that sort of thing. I remember at one stage finding women in my local area who were working in the fields that I was looking at, and reaching out to them and asking if I could have a chat to them about their career path as a way of trying to understand what the experience of it was of being in that career. Um, what else? What else? It's probably writing.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
it's stuff, like
yeah,
just doing whatever it took to explore, is this something that is possible or that I would even want to do?
yes.
And was there any moment where you let potentially what other people might think, or given the fact that you're 57 when you're doing this and have been, I guess, an expert in doing what you had been doing, knowing that you'd be going into something else at a lower level or a more beginner level? How was that sort of playing out? How did that feel
It's
for you?
really uncomfortable.
Well, it's uncomfortable, but you still did it.
I did. And I really had to bring
Mm.
my learner's mindset. I had to decide that I was going to put aside expert and become learner. And really, if this is the path I was choosing for myself, I needed to um, set aside some of the other behaviors and ideas and move into a different space. So, when I do work with women now, I'm an expert in the process of holding space for them in the coaching role, but I'm not an expert in their lives. They're the ones who know all about themselves, and so it's been quite the journey to put down the clever is how I describe it.
Oh, I love that. Because as you're saying it, I know the conversations I'm having with women as well. And that whole concern about, but I've done what I've done and I've done it so well and I'm good at it, to go into something I don't know and be the beginner again or the novice, or, at this age, how would that make me feel? I love, and as you were doing this, were you getting any coaching, or what resources were you tapping into for you to allow you to continue down this path of experimentation?
I was seeing a coach, an executive coach,
Mm-hmm.
and a therapist, which is always helpful,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and had the support of my family. And I think that having those supports was really helpful. I also have a sister who's a coach, and she was already a coach and was really available to me at that time to talk to me about what her experience was and what she loved about it. And I think what she did was really demonstrated to me the value of, through her own work and the way that she described it, was able to demonstrate the real value of coaching. I mean, I'd already experienced it myself as an executive, but outside of that world, to see and hear other stories of the value of coaching was really powerful.
Mm. I think also too, when you've been a coach or when you are a coach, and this is my world, like I am a coach. However, being coached and being coachable is a whole nother experience. And how did you find the process being on the other side?
I loved it. I love I love both being a coach and being coached. And one of the people I met in my
Mm.
coaching course, we continue to meet fortnightly, where we take it in turns to coach each other. So we're both the coach and the coachee, once a month for each other. And that's
Ooh.
been over 2 years now, and that's been just the most delightful of experiences. We come from very different worlds, and yet we've found this lovely mutual benefit and exchange in our work.
Oh, I love that. I love that you've got someone every fortnight that you practice both sides on. Tell me, when being coached, what you love about it. Like, what was it? Because as soon as I said it, you lit up.
Oh, I think I'm a really reflective person. So
Ah,
when a coach asks a question that gets me thinking, I just love
mm.
that process. I love it. I love to be um, just taken into a different set of ideas, a different thoughts than the ones I'm already having. I really enjoy that process.
Oh, that's beautiful. And doing the coaching now at this stage, what was coming up for you? Where was it helping you decide, and what decisions did you make around what you pursued, where you moved from experimentation phase into I'm actually doing this phase?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I sat with was how was the part of me that wants to change the world going to be satisfied in this new role of being a coach? And coaching is one-on-one work, and of course, it's changing the world for that person.
Mm.
And I run small groups as well, and that's a similar process. It's a personal development process. But for me, not but, and for me, I'd spent my life um, taking on bigger sort of social issues. And so I think what I came to was that if I had a particular focus in my coaching that was supporting a particular group of women, I could also be taking the sort of issues and challenges that I was seeing in my work into the broader kind of domain of the world. And that sounds really flaky. I'm not finding great words for it. But what I mean by that, for example, is that I work with women over 50, and the world doesn't see women over 50 very kindly, and often doesn't see them at all. So there's a lot of invisibility. There's a lot of ageism that we experience in the world and that we internalize ourselves. And I hear that with my clients all the time, and I'm sure that you do as well. And so, how do I take a role in drawing attention to those issues, to ageist ideas? And so, I use my social media platform for challenging ageism and joining in other networks like the Every Age Counts campaign, which is about tackling ageism in Australia. So, I've found my way of continuing to contribute on the bigger stage and really work in powerful ways with the women who are in front of me at the same time.
Oh, that's beautiful. And do you think the fact that you are a 57 or going on 60 now, year old woman helps? Like, do you feel that that gives you more credibility when working with this woman as opposed to, say, being, I don't know, a 39-year-old?
Yeah, I
And what do you
do.
think
Yeah,
you
yep,
do
yeah.
yeah.
And I think because um, there's something that happens to women in midlife that is, I don't think is talked about, that's not, is hardly written about. And so, not having had the experience of that or the exposure to that through yourself or your friendship network or your professional work, then I think younger women may not really fully have the insights as to what that stage of life is like. Yeah.
I completely agree. Because I'm 52, I'll be 53 later this year. So, yeah, totally agree. How has that played out in your life? So, as an almost 60-year-old woman, and I love that we're being so open about age because it gives so much context to where you're at and, in particular, the work that you're doing. How have you experienced ageism, for example, in, say, the last sort of 10 years of your career and in life, just in life in general?
Mm. Yeah. I don't know quite how to answer that. I think what I would say in the workplace if I think about the ways in which workplaces support career growth and development, in an academic environment, there's lots of support for students. There's lots of support for what we call postdocs, so someone who's finished their degree and they're now entering a new phase of their career. There's lots of support and for mid-career researchers, and then from a career development perspective, it's a bit of a vacuum. And so that's really, to me, saying that universities are all about bringing up the younger generation, which is really, really important. I don't want to suggest that it's not, but it's this blind spot for anyone over 45 to think about, well, I'm still working and I'm probably going to be working for another 20 plus years. How can my career be supported? So I think that that's a bit of a blind spot in academia, but actually in most workplaces. And in fact, the research in Australia around the way in which HR managers think about mature age workers, they define mature age workers younger every year. So every year when there's research done, so mature age workers are considered 45 plus, and lots of HR managers report that they don't necessarily value mature age workers and see them as a problem or difficult. Or so there, you can hear there's just this inherent challenge that people experience in workplaces when you've got those kind of attitudes around you. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
absolutely. And
saying it
40,
as though, yeah, and I'm saying that really, it's kind of, I'd have to say, personally, I didn't feel unsupported in my role, and I don't know that I experienced ageism, but I was really aware of, by mentoring younger people, about the opportunities that were afforded that weren't available to later career staff.
Oh, absolutely. And I've got a number of girlfriends actually who are in their 50s, had very, very senior corporate roles, made redundant, thinking, because they're highly employable, highly skilled, thinking they get a job reasonably easily and really struggling. And often men would get the job younger and half the experience over them. And they were really unexpectedly challenged, and they didn't think that that's how it would be. But do you think also too that some of this, and this is a lot of the work I've been doing too, looking at how much of it is actually what is happening in society and people maybe not giving opportunities, or how much is it that as you get older yourself and maybe start to lose touch with who you are, so haven't done the work that say you've done or that I've done to really understand who I am as a person and feel very, very comfortable about that. How do you think this whole almost invisibility and ageism plays out for them? And do you think that exacerbates it?
I think that lots of women, and probably you and I included in that, internalize ageism. So
Mm.
we are both in a process of redefining ourselves um, and making big changes in our lives, and also doing battle with um, what should I be doing at this age? What does this time mean? What does it look like for me? And I think that my greatest advice would be, get rid of the noise about age and focus on you and where you are and what matters to you.
Oh, absolutely. Completely agree. And actually, it's interesting the way that the word courageous me came out for me. I was at Matchbox buying some mugs as gifts because I was doing a lot of research, interviewing women around the role that value and success play in their lives. And one of the mugs, they had words on them: wild, fierce, strong, and courageous. And the woman who was serving me, I said, oh, which word do you like? And she was she was late 50s. And she said, oh, courageous. And I said, why? And she said, because don't we all need a bit more courage? Anyway, long story short, but I said, what do you need courage for? And she'd always wanted to be a lawyer. And she'd done a lot of work in the legal space, but had never got her qualifications. And when I asked her why she hadn't, she's like, oh, I can't go back now. Like, I'm in my late 50s. What would people think? This is ridiculous. Anyway, by the end of that conversation, she sat back and thought, I could at least go and do the research, like what you did, your 90-day, 1 hour a day, 90 days experiment. Just go and do the research. What would it involve? What would it take? And all of a sudden, you could just see this whole change in her demeanor that,
Yeah, I love
maybe
that.
I could. Maybe I'm the one who has self-imposed those limitations and judgments and what others will think. But they've never even had a chance to do that because I've put it all in my own head.
Yeah, I love that. And it's really that that idea of all of the possibilities that still lie ahead. And, when I talk to women about retirement, for example, retirement's this really old-fashioned idea of, that was really to do with men working full time and they stop working and they die. And actually, none of our lives are like that anymore. So people like you and I have had careers and we've been in and out of employment, having children, part-time work, flexibility, moving around. When it comes to moving towards the end of our careers, there are all sorts of pathways out of that. Some people never stop working. Some people do what I've done. I don't think of myself as retired, but put down a career and pick up something else entirely different for the remainder of their career. And there are so many different pathways and opportunities. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about being part of our generation is that never before has there been a generation of women in Australia who have worked their whole lives and who have highly educated and have disposable income and financial independence. And I'm not saying that's true for everybody, of course not, but there is a generation of women like that as never before. And it means that we have possibilities and opportunities for creating lives that are really aligned with who we are and what we want to be. Then the challenge is to find that out.
I agree. I totally agree because I often I have I have this beautiful girlfriend. She's my age, so she's 50. Actually, she's just turned 53. And whenever we talk, she just wants to retire at 60. Right? This is her mission, and I'm like, well, what are you going to do at 60 if you retire? But I've thought of it always as you retire from a job, whereas you don't retire if it's a calling. It's work
Yeah.
you do. Like now I'm doing work I love. I plan on doing it until I can no longer do it.
Yep.
Whereas retirement is, retiring from the job, like the 9 to 5, or working for the, the company or the corporate or whatever that might be.
Mhm.
Whereas, this is a stage in life where you get to go, hey, I've got all this newly found confidence and, knowledge of who I am and knowing what my gifts are. I want to get out there and use them in a way that suits me. And this is stuff that we don't typically do when we're younger, when we're just, building our careers and following a path that we're in. We get to do that now. Like, isn't this just the cool thing? You are testament to doing this. So what other things have you done for you that have allowed you to follow this path and turn it into something that I can tell, so passionate about?
Yeah, I've really had to start from scratch by going off. The first thing to do was to decide what sort of education I wanted to do around this. And so it was really important to me if I was going to hang up my shackle and say I'm a coach, to make sure that I was qualified for that and that I was meeting ethical standards and guidelines and all of that sort of thing. So part of the International Coaching Federation, doing a course and really setting myself up well, having supervision, having these peer-to-peer coaching sessions, getting lots of practice done. So that getting into the work was really important to me. But of course, coaching and facilitation, as you would know from your work, is part of the job. The other part is running a business. It's being active on social media. It's setting up, a website and your accounting system and all of those other things behind the scenes. So that's been a huge learning curve for me. And I have to say, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Sometimes I think I could just sit and create websites forever. I've so enjoyed the creative process of designing a website, and I've actually designed more than one now, that it's really been a surprise and a delight for me. You look surprised.
Totally surprised. I did not expect you to say that. And it's interesting because I so often hear women that are doing what we're doing and going off and starting something new, and in particular that have come from a more corporate or structured environment to doing things. This is the part they hate. They're having to do the website and learn the accounting and the running of the business side of it. What I'm fascinated on is how much you've loved it and that you've loved creating the website. What did you love about it? What was it?
Well, I think, you know, a website, for example, articulates what you're about. So you have to go through the process of being clear enough about what you're about and why to be able to put it down in writing on a screen for other people to then know about you when they look at your website. So that's the conceptual process, which is really fun for me. And then there was the design element and needing to learn the functionality of a website and the design element of, using photos and color and fonts and all that sort of thing. And creating a logo. Oh my God, I drove my family nuts. I loved it so much. They would actually come in because I was doing all of this outside of my paid job as well. So I was working and playing around with some of these things at night and on weekends, and they would have to come and drag me out of my office to come and eat because could just get lost for hours in the creative process. So I've really, really enjoyed that.
Oh, I love it. You created your own logo and did all your own design of your
I
website.
did everything.
I've done all mine too because, like you, I love it. That's why I was interested to know what you love about it. I love it because, and I wonder if this can't be a coincidence. I'm very, very clear on who I am as well, as are you. So I find it very easy to write this stuff. Whereas if we weren't, would it be that easy and that enjoyable? Whereas like you, it's very easy to get lost then in the creativity because I knew what I had a vision or an idea of what I want to come out. And it was quite easy. So that's so interesting. What about the social media side? How do you go with that?
I'm doing better this year. So
Progress, not perfection.
exactly. Thank you. So I think the way I have thought about the last 2 years is that I kind of think about it in terms of a triangle, really, a sideways triangle, where starting off, a lot of your work is about the administration, the side of the website, setting everything up and getting going and letting people know about your work. And the client work is smaller because you're just getting started. And what I've loved over the 2 years is that the client work's on the increase and the administration is on the decrease. And I think that's what, it's absolutely where I want to be. I want to be with clients and working with clients rather than creating pretty pictures for LinkedIn, although I enjoy it. But my real passion is to work directly with women.
Well, that's where you really make the biggest impact, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Sue, tell me a bit about the work that you're doing now. I know we've sort of touched on it throughout, but tell me about what it is. Like, if I asked you, what do you do?
Yep.
How would you respond?
I would say that I support women over 50, so women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who are experiencing a life or career transition to lead flourishing lives. So I do that by coaching, running small groups and workshops. So and I guess the other element that I do is about tackling ageism. So I'm a bit of an anti-ageism warrior.
Oh, I love that. An anti-ageism warrior. Oh, that's so cool. With the women that you're working with, in particular, sort of over 50s and wanting to flourish, but having a transition, what would you say are the top 3 challenges that the majority face at that age and stage of life?
Yeah, I guess the way I think about it is that there are age stage things that women go through in midlife that are about children reaching a point where they don't need you as much. So there's a bit of an opening up in your life. Perimenopause and menopause, I know you've spoken about that on this show, is a time of kind of reckoning, really. In fact, I've listened to Brene Brown recently talk about midlife, and she talks about that it's not so much, midlife isn't so much a crisis, but a slow unravelling. So it is
that's way nicer.
So it's a time of unraveling, but also then knitting back or recreating life going forward. So there's the natural processes of our bodies, there's the stage of our family lives, and then there's also, for many women, the process of caring for aging parents, or their parents have just died. So there's these other big shifts and changes. And in that space comes up these big questions about, well, who am I now? Who am I really now? And so they're the women that I work with who are thinking about those sort of questions for themselves. And sometimes that's about a career change, that they see themselves wanting to do something different. Sometimes it's about navigating another part of their life, whether it's about changing relationships in their families, or changing, they want to be more actively engaged in community and friendship and making a contribution to the community, whatever the thing is for them that is coming up as something that they want to give attention to. So I hold space for them to be able to do that and explore for themselves what they want that to look like, and what they want to do about taking action toward that. So that's a major part of my work. And then the other part, as I mentioned, is supporting women who are getting ready for retirement. So that's similar types of issues, in the sense of who will I be without a job? One woman said to me, I think of myself as untitled and untethered after my career finishes, and that's wonderful and terrifying all at once. And so there's this opportunity for reinvention. And when we are living 30 years longer than we did 100 years ago, there's a lot of time after work to live a healthy, engaged life. And so what does that look like? What does that look like for women? How can they bring that for themselves? Mm.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, and super love that whole thing about if this is a time for reinvention. If any time was going to be the right time to think about, who do you really, or who are you, and how do you want to bring that out into the world? Midlife is the most beautiful time to do it. There's actually, I do a lot of reading on menopause. There's a book, and I cannot remember the name of the author, but she talks about it as not just a transition, but actually as an upgrade, because it's
Yes,
a
I
time
love
when
that.
you give so less attention to what other people think of you. You've got more confidence. You just don't let the hang-ups and the problems that have bothered you for so long, they're not in the way anymore. So you've now got a chance to paint, almost with a clear canvas, the life that you want. But the challenge is then you give people the canvas and the paintbrushes, and they're like, I don't know what to do. So helping them work out, what do you want that to look like? Such an important piece of work. And I'm very, very excited by the work you're doing, very connected to it as well personally, from not only my own situation, but a lot of the women that I do work with as well. So just on that note, what's the next thing that you've got to really reach in and find some courage for? Or are you doing it right now?
Oh, I'm doing it every day. But I think for me, I've still got 2 of my 3 kids at home, and
Mm,
there's a real process of letting go as they get older, and
yeah.
some grief associated with that, but also this opening up of more time and more space in my own life as well, that's available for me to explore some other parts of my what's next. So that's, the needing to get to know that part of myself, and then um, uh, go forward with that self-knowledge.
Beautiful. So I'll put all your details in the show notes, but where just in like quickly would people go straight away if they want to find out about you and follow along more, or, sign up and get some of your coaching or some of your group
Yeah,
programs?
so it's really easy to find me on LinkedIn, Sue West, and I have flourishafter50.com.au is my website.
Beautiful. I'll put those details in. Would you do me one last favor?
Hmm.
Could you read the words of that David White
Yes,
poem
I would
again on
love
courage
to. I
for
would
us?
love to.
Thank
I think
you.
when I found this poem, and this is only part of the poem, it brought tears to my eyes. It just spoke
Mm.
to me so much. So he says, "Courage is the measure of our heartfelt participation with life, with another, with a community, a work, a future. To be courageous is not necessarily to go anywhere or do anything, except to make conscious those things we already feel deeply, and then to live through the unending vulnerabilities of those consequences.
Oh, I just love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that poem, but in particular for sharing your story. I know this is only a teeny tiny part of it, but thank you. And thank you for being somewhere out, as someone who's gone out there, reinventing yourself and showing at any age and any stage of your life, you can work out who you are and follow what's deep inside you that lights you up and just go for it. You just got to have the courage to do it. Sue West, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Kim.